Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Bible study. Once again, we are in the book of Psalms, and we are in Psalm 141 today. Now, if you read this, which hopefully you've already done, you will maybe have come across some tricky verses. This is not the easiest psalm to understand. In fact, there's one verse that, I'll be honest, I still don't understand. and, there's some that, there's plenty of passages in the Bible where you have to do some interpreting and you come to a conclusion about maybe like what the likely interpretation is. There's one verse in here that you'll see is like, I'm not even sure I can get to that point, but we'll talk about that in a second. Psalm 141, our outline is available on our website for free as always. This one was written by David. He's written the last, 2, 3? And I don't have any New Testament references. By way of themes, I've got 2 today. The first one, protecting the heart from the influence of evil people. And number 2, requesting God's help to walk in his ways. And then one word to define, which is a familiar one. Sheol, verse 7, it appears again. And verse 7, I will say, is the tricky verse, the very difficult verse to understand. Sheol refers to the place of the dead, generally in the Bible, or the grave. It sometimes can be used to refer to a dark or an unknown place, like a place underground. For our 10 verses today, I've entitled them Protection from the Influence of Sinners. In the last psalm, Psalm 140, and other psalms that we've read, we find out that David is very concerned about the actions and deeds and lives of wicked people. He wants them to be thwarted. He wants them to be punished. But in Psalm 141, it shows us that David's first priority was his own heart, as it should be with any good man. He wanted to keep his own heart pure, and he didn't want to become like these evil people. He wanted to be careful about his lifestyle. He wanted to be careful about the things that he said. David didn't want his heart to be attracted by the way or the lifestyle of sinners. He prayed that God would keep him from tasting the delicacies of sin. Sometimes sin can taste kind of good, at least on the surface, and David didn't want to be deceived by that. David was open to being influenced, even corrected or rebuked by righteous people, but he absolutely didn't want the evil people to be able to influence his heart. He prayed that their efforts would come to nothing. Now, this brings us to verses 6 and 7, and arguably 5 is kind of in this category as well, but these verses have been a challenge for Bible students for centuries. If you look up commentaries, and I've looked up several written by people who lived in like the 1700s all the way up until today, the next couple verses are very, very challenging. It's difficult to understand what David was trying to communicate. And I should mention, just to be clear, this isn't a deficiency in the text or in David's writing, certainly not in the Holy Spirit who inspired the Scriptures, but there's something here that's difficult for us as modern readers to understand. Maybe it's something in the Hebrew, maybe it's a turn of phrase or an idiom or just something that David had in mind that we are struggling to figure out. Just know there are verses in the Bible that are difficult to understand, and how these verses and the illustrations in these verses connect to the overall theme of the psalm, it's hard to say. Let's read those 2 verses, 6 and 7, just in their entirety, so you get an idea of what they say. Verse 6 reads, "When their judges are thrown over the cliff, then they shall hear my words, for they are pleasant." And verse 7, "As when one plows and breaks up the earth, so shall our bones be scattered at the mouth of Sheol." So let's take a stab at understanding verse 6 first of all, and let me read it again. "When their judges are thrown over the cliff, then they shall hear my words, for they are pleasant." So it may be here that David is saying that only when the chiefs of these wicked people, only when their leaders, their judges, we would assume these would be unjust judges who don't uphold the law, it's only when they receive their deserved punishment and are thrown over a cliff, that's evidently what David might have thought they deserved, only then will those who follow them recognize the wisdom in David's godly words and in his godly lifestyle. I'd encourage you, if you have some time and have some interest, go out and check out some other interpretations of verse 6. There's quite a few of them, and they vary somewhat widely. In my opinion, verse 7 is the more challenging verse, though. Let's read that one again. "As one plows and breaks up the earth, so shall our bones be scattered at the mouth of Sheol." I have read some more and thought about this for quite some time, and as far as an interpretation for verse 7, this is what I have in my notes. "I have yet to discover an explanation for these words that seems valid enough to present as a possible interpretation." In other words, I don't know what David is saying here, and I don't even feel confident in suggesting an interpretation because I've yet to hear one that even seems halfway decent. I haven't copped out on too many verses in the Bible, I don't think, but this one is still a mystery to me. So we're always learning, we're always studying. Maybe something we read throughout the rest of the Old Testament may tip me off to what exactly is intended here. But we'll save this one for later, and that's one to grow on. Now, the final 3 verses of the psalm are much easier to understand. David resolved to fix his eyes on the Lord. He wasn't going to pay attention to these evil people, be influenced by them. He's going to fix his eyes on the Lord. He asked God to help him evade the traps of the wicked, and he requested the wicked to be tripped up by their own snares. For our application today, I want to take it from verse 5, and it's this: it's better to taste the unpleasant reproof of a righteous man than the delicacies of a godless flatterer. Now, David wasn't a perfect man, and he knew it, but he was a wise man. He wasn't going to take advice from sinful people, even when they presented it to him as something desirable. He was, however, willing to heed the advice of godly people, even when it came in the form of a corrective rebuke. For our application, here's something to think about. The advice, the guidance that you really need may be sent to you by God in the form of a reprimand or some other unpleasant encounter. If that correction comes from a godly person, you would be a fool to discard it just because you don't like the way that it was delivered. The book of Proverbs, which is the next book, speaks to this quite clearly in Proverbs 12 and Proverbs 15, and I want to conclude with 2 verses. Proverbs 12:1 reads like this: "Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid." If you can't take an appropriate reproof and take it to heart if it comes from a good source, then you're a stupid person. And then in verse 15, or chapter 15, verse 31 through 33, "The ear that listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. Whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence. The fear of the Lord is instruction and wisdom, and humility comes before honor." It does take humility to receive a correction or a reproof, but the writer of Proverbs says that a wise and a godly person will humble themselves and receive the correction and take it to heart.